This was the commencement of a nervous fever which confined me for several months. During all that time, Henry was my only nurse. I afterwards learned that, knowing my father's advanced age and unfitness for so long a journey, and how wretched my sickness would make Elizabeth, he spared them this grief by concealing the extent of my disorder. He knew that I could not have a more kind and attentive nurse than himself, and, firm in the hope he felt of my recovery, he did not doubt that, instead of doing harm, he performed the kindest action that he could towards them. But I was in reality very ill, and surely nothing but the unbounded and unremitting attentions of my friend could have restored me to life. The form of the monster on whom I had bestowed existence was forever before my eyes, and I raved incessantly concerning him. Doubtless my words surprised Henry. He at first believed them to be the wanderings of my disturbed imagination, but the pertinacity with which I continually recurred to the same subject persuaded him that my disorder indeed owed its origins to some uncommon and terrible event. So while Clerval's nursing him back to health, he's listening to him like ranting and raving while he's in and out of consciousness, but he's really not putting together what it is, just like some horrible event happened basically, but he's not really sure what exactly. By very slow degrees, and with frequent relapses that alarmed and grieved my friend, I recovered. I remember the first time I became capable of observing outward objects with any kind of pleasure. I perceived that the fallen leaves had disappeared, and that the young buds were shooting forth from the trees that shaded my window. It was a divine spring, and the season contributed greatly to my convalescence. I felt also sentiments of joy and affection revive in my bosom. My gloom disappeared, and in a short time I became as cheerful as before I was attacked by the fatal passion. "Dearest Clerval," exclaimed I, "how kind, how very good you are to me. This whole winter, instead of being spent in study as you promised yourself, has been consumed in my sick room. How shall I ever repay you? I feel the greatest remorse for the disappointment of which I have been the occasion, but you will forgive me." "You will repay me entirely if you do not discompose yourself, but get well as fast as you can. And since you appear in such good spirits, I may speak to you on one subject, may I not?" I trembled. One subject? What could it be? Could he allude to an object on whom I dared not even think? "Compose yourself," said Clerval, who observed my change of color. "I will not mention it if it agitates you. But your father and cousin would be very happy if they received a letter from you in your own handwriting. They hardly know how ill you have been, and are uneasy at your long silence." "Is that all, my dear Henry? How could you suppose that my first thought would not fly towards those dear, dear friends whom I love, and who are so deserving of my love? If this is your present temper, my friend, you will perhaps be glad to see a letter that has been lying here some days for you. It is from your cousin, I believe." And his cousin is Elizabeth, just so you know, okay? Because like they're not going to say, "Hey, it's from your sister and your romantic interest." So they like the word cousin, remember, is like a term of endearment, like my love, my friend, my cousin. Okay, and so it's from Elizabeth. The letter is from Elizabeth. Okay, so then you guys, if you would go to chapter 6 and kind of look at chapter 6 a little bit. This is a letter. You see where the quotes start here? Okay, and this is Elizabeth writing to Victor. And she's like, "My dearest cousin, you've been ill and Henry's been telling us," and blah, blah, blah. And then what she does in this whole letter, guys, is basically run through the family and what they're up to. Remember I told you how he has a couple brothers, right? His dad, and she's just given Justine, who they kind of adopted as like their employee, right? Their helper, if you will, but they adopted her in too. And she just goes through everyone here. So she talks about dad and how he's a little bit sick because he's older in age now, but you know, he's just concerned about Victor. She talks about, you know, their like summer house or where they travel or whatever. She talks about Justine, their employee, and how helpful she is and how she seems so happy living with them and everything. Because remember, Justine was like the abused one from her family. And She talks about when their aunt died. Okay, guys, I don't know if we talked about this. She calls, oh my gosh, Elizabeth calls Victor's mom and dad her aunt and uncle. Okay, not mom and dad. Even though they adopted her and she was brought up as like their child, she still calls them aunt and uncle. Okay. Victor's mom died before he went off to college. She got really sick. What happened is Elizabeth got really sick. Oh my gosh, you guys, I'm trying to think of the disease at this time that Elizabeth got sick with. And the mom nursed her back to health, took care of her, and she got the illness by taking care of her, and died from that illness. Okay, so that's one of the things in Victor's mind, very much like Mary Shelley, right? Remember all the death and loss she experienced? She puts that onto Victor a little bit too through her writing, that he experienced the loss of family very young also. And so that is maybe a part of the whole creating of this monster, okay? All right, so anyway, then she talks about like little William. Remember, he's the little 5-year-old, adorable. She says he has a bunch of little wives, meaning like he's got all the little girls in town loving him, okay? And he's like 5 years old. And then that's about it, guys. She's just catching him up on everything and everyone, okay? So that's basically what chapter 6 is all about, this letter, okay? All right, guys, now that'll wrap up chapter 5 and 6, and then your next assignment is going to be reading chapter 7, which is another letter, okay? So this one ends all happy and everything's great, and she's catching him up with the family, and they miss him, and they're hoping he's doing well, and then all of a sudden the chapter 7 letter hits, and it's traumatic and definitely a turn of events here, okay? Hey, in the meantime, you guys, are you not wondering where this monster is? Because, apparently Victor isn't worried about where this monster is, but that's something I'd be thinking about here. And he seems happy that he doesn't know where it is. So I don't know, but it's still out there. So keep that in mind too. All right, guys.